record. There we go. To those who just joined, we'll get started in just a moment. We're just waiting for a couple more people who signed up to log on. Well, if you're ready, Rima, maybe we can get started and people will continue to come in.
Sure.
Okay. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for logging on and attending this evening's program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, just a few things to note. Please let me know in the chat if there are any technical issues I can try to resolve. You can also send questions there, or you can unmute yourself and talk. This program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Rima Pande, author of His Voice. She is a healthcare strategy consultant by day. Rima's book is a fictionalized version of her real life experience. It's an attempt to give voice to her father's unspoken thoughts, capturing the swirl of emotions that went through his mind during the 2 difficult years when he was bedridden and unable to speak. This book and talk also connects others through a framework of respect, resilience, and realism in life and our relationships. So now please welcome Rima.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. Thanks to Cary Library and specifically Matt for organizing this event. And thank you all for joining what I hope will be an interactive discussion. I will start with a brief introduction and talk a little bit about the book, but very, very quickly open it up for questions and discussion. So a little bit about me. I grew up in India. Have been a Lexington resident for about 15 years. I have 3 kids, 2 young adults and a 10-year-old. And this is my first book, as Matt said in his introductions for folks who are joining now. This is based on my real life experience with my father's illness a few years ago. And what I would like to do, just to get the conversation started, even before we start, talking about the book, is I'm going to share a few numbers with you, and I'd like you to guess what the numbers refer to. If you do want to guess, please put your answer in the chat box. And I don't think there's any prizes for the right answer unless Matt has any prizes for us. But let me just quickly share my screen. Okay, so the book we're going to talk about today is His Voice. I'm the author, Rima Pande. And for folks who want to learn a little bit more about the book and are interested, I do have a website which is at the bottom of the screen. It's hisvoice.live. Okay, question 1. 795,000. Any guesses on what that number might be? I know I'm just throwing it out there. Matt, let me know if there's any guesses. Okay, so 795,000.
Oh, someone actually just typed in breaths in a certain period of time.
Oh, that's interesting. So in this case, that might actually be true. But in this case, that 795,000 is roughly the number of people who get a stroke annually or in the United States. So all these are US figures. Second one, and I'll wait a little bit longer than I did this time. Any guesses? it is related to the first number. So 40 seconds, someone in the United States gets a stroke every 40 seconds. So that's how, that's kind of just puts that number 795,000 in perspective.
Someone had just added or asked if it was to prevent permanent damage.
That I think is a few hours actually. So if someone gets a stroke and they can get to a hospital or an ER and get diagnosed, and that's important, getting diagnosed within a certain time period. I think it is 2 or 3 hours. I'm not 100% sure. Any guesses? So someone dies of a stroke every 4 minutes. Next number. So there are 7 million stroke survivors, living in the United States. %25 of stroke survivors are severely impaired. So of anyone who gets a stroke, there's about 10% who recover fully. There's 25% who are severely impaired, and everyone in between has, mild or moderate impairment. 5.4 million. That's the number of people living with paralysis in the United States. So out of that 5.4 million, about 34% paralyzed, I'm sorry for the typo, due to stroke. The rest are usually due to spinal cord injuries or multiple sclerosis, I think, are the other two. So net, if you think about like 25% of 7 million or 34% of 54 million, either way, that's about 1.8 or 2 million people who are severely impaired due to stroke. So coming back, to the book, I just kind of wanted to start that to put this in perspective. This is not, even though for me this is a pretty unique story because it's very personal to me. This is something that a lot of people in the world are dealing with. But just coming back to my book, my father had 2 successive strokes within a month of each other. And, for about 2 years, my mom took care of him, kind of served him selflessly. She was supported by an amazing group of family, friends, helpers. And she set a very positive, respectful, uplifting, and happy tone in the house. So he was constantly surrounded by people, music, conversation. It's what my book editor calls the circle of love and care. And during this time, I spent a lot of time with them, and we constantly stared at his changing expressions because that's the only clue we had in terms of how he might be feeling, what he might be thinking, and try to figure out really basic things like, was he too hot? Was he too cold? Was he in pain? Was he comfortable? Was he happy? Was he sad? And we search for direction, often assuming or pretending to understand what we thought he would like us to do, and then doing it, and then waiting for an imperceptible nod of approval, and hoping that we did the right thing. And while he slept, I often sat and wondered what was going through his head. I kind of tried to imagine his thoughts and try to kind of immerse myself in his stream of consciousness. And that's how I kind of started writing this book. So what you see on this next slide is really the blurb on the back cover of the book. So it talks about the main character, the protagonist, with the character that's based on my father, Agastya Raj, has a stroke that leaves him paralyzed from the neck down and unable to speak. As he lies in bed, enveloped by a circle of love and care orchestrated by his wife, Khushi, he shares with us the tumultuous thoughts that swirl in his mind. And then it talks about pretty much what I just mentioned. This is really my effort to become my father's voice. So it's my effort to give voice to his unspoken thoughts and emotions, interspersed with the memories of key life experiences during the two years that he was bedridden and unable to speak. So what the book evolved into as I was writing it was almost a memoir of sorts. So while I was trying to imagine what he was thinking, it was really, what could he think about? He could think about his current state, as he was really thoughtfully dealing with a crisis where he had lost complete control of his life. And what else could he think about? He could think about his past, key experiences of his life. So it is a memoir of sorts. It's written in first person. It's a narrative. It's conversational. It's not heavy or depressing. It's a person talking to you. And what it really is to me is it's the extraordinary story of an ordinary person. Each of us has a unique life story, and this just happens to be my father's life story. The reason I published this book, because I wrote it many years ago and finally decided to publish it last year, was mainly to draw attention to the challenges associated with aging and disability, and the immense physical, mental, and emotional burden on caregivers, and also think about how important it is to think about healthcare decisions holistically, and to do so from a patient point of view. So that's really what this book is about. And Matt referred to this a little bit at the beginning in the introduction, but to me, his voice is about 3 R's: respect, resilience, and realism. First and foremost, it's about respect. It's really about how important it is to maintain the dignity of a person who's in a helpless state. And in such situations, we also need immense resilience as we kind of work with what life throws at us, do our best without breaking down. And while we're doing that, we need a dose of realism, which is understanding that all our efforts may not yield the results that we hope for, but nevertheless continuing. And a fourth R, which I personally really began to appreciate when this happened, is relationships. It's about the key relationships in our lives: spousal commitment, the parent-child bond, family support. And my hope is that people who read this book will kind of pause acknowledge and appreciate those key relationships in their own lives. And I hope that they will think about how they view and interact with people who are not fully functional. And I hope this book will help anyone who has either gone through, is currently going through, or may face a crisis situation, which unfortunately, many of us do and are very unprepared for. So that's my, quick introduction to the book. And at this point, I'd like to pause and, ask if anybody has questions.
I had a few questions related, general questions, if no one else has any. I myself have not had this experience or similar experience, but I was curious, like when you started writing this book, did you write it during, like while your father was in this condition? Was it after? Was it helpful for like any sort of grieving process?
So I wrote it just after, and I think it was actually pretty much a therapeutic experience for me. That's how it started. I did not kind of open my laptop and say, I'm going to write a book. There was this need in me to just kind of capture, his thoughts. It was this whole, the process was overwhelming, as, these situations usually are. And just the thought of someone going from being completely independent to a completely helpless state where they're kind of locked into their body. And it was just something that I had to get out, and I think that's how I started writing it. And I just kept writing for a few months, and then I put it away. And in 2020, during the pandemic, we were all home, and we started talking, and we kind of pulled out the manuscript, not physically, but the e-manuscript, dusted it off, started reading it again, and a couple of people in my family read it. I shared it with my mom, and then we just decided to go ahead and publish. And that's how it happened.
What is your family's impression of the book?
It's a good question. So I definitely shared it with the few people who are, yes, the protagonists of the book. My mom, first and foremost. She is just as much, I would say, a main character in the book as my father is, and she was initially uncomfortable because it's a very personal story. She was uncomfortable because it was personal, but she was also uncomfortable just, I guess, being a character in a book is kind of a strange, a strange experience. But then, so she took a while. She took a few weeks, and I basically said, if you think this is something we should share, we will, and if you don't, we will not. And so after a few weeks, she decided that she wanted to share it. I think partly because I wanted to share it, and she wanted to support me, but also just the thought that it might be helpful to some people was kind of enough to for her to kind of say yes. I mean, I do have to say I was very nervous the day I published it, not because it wasn't as if hundreds of people or thousands of people are going to be reading it, but I think it's just because it's a personal experience. It's just hard for you to put it out there, and you kind of wonder whether you did the right thing or not. But I've been encouraged by some of the conversations I've had since then with folks, and I'm really happy that you decided to publish at this point.
Why did you choose to write a fictionalized version of the story as opposed to the story as it happened? I'm sure there's a lot of
Yeah,
crossover, but
yeah. So there is actually a lot of crossover. I would say, it's not very fictionalized. It is fictionalized partly. Again, mainly to kind of protect individual people who are on whom the characters are based, and that was really the only reason. Even names, I could have used real names, but there's something really awkward about using real names when it's partly fictionalized, and so yeah, it was just. I would say the story, the experience is true to life. This is how I imagined. This is what I imagined my father would be thinking. Some of the facts and events and kind of very specific pieces of the book may be fictionalized, but uh, it is mostly a kind of a memoir of his life.
I see. If others have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat. Oh, there's a question here. Someone said they've not read the book yet, but they have a copy now. How long did you spend in India when the stroke happened?
So I traveled back and forth a lot. He had 2 strokes, so I obviously flew over when the first one happened, stayed for a few weeks, came back. Within a few days, he had a second stroke, so went back again. And then I kind of got into a cadence of traveling back every few months. So every couple of months, I would take maybe 3 weeks off from work and just go back. So I would say over the 2 years, I probably spent 3 months of the year, 4 months of the year with them. So it was, in certain intervals. And over the summer, it was longer because I just, the kids went back with me and we would just spend more time there.
There was actually another question. If you could read a passage from the book, or could you read a passage from the book?
Yeah, I could. Let me actually. Is it okay if I read? I'll just read, a few excerpts if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
And, let's see, I'm just kind of flipping through a little bit. So this one is when he has his first stroke and he kind of wakes up and is still confused about what's going on. I'm going to have to put the book up here. And so he's surrounded by people. Everyone's asking him questions. He's in a hospital bed in an ICU. Everyone's, there's all these questions happening. How are you feeling? Can you do this? Can you do that? Lift your right arm, lift your leg. And he's very confused about, what's going on. He's not quite sure yet. And so he says, meanwhile, I concentrate my full attention on my limbs, willing them to move. move. The mental effort I'm making should have my legs thrashing around like crazy beings, but they continue to lie there, unaffected, indifferent, like soldiers on mutiny. There is a brief moment of hope as the doctor taps my big toe and I see it twitch. But that is quickly lost. A fog of panic sweeps through me, rising like a volcano bursting through my insides, making me hot, bothered, nauseated. It is now obvious that I am not waking up from an ordinary nap. Things are definitely wrong. I can sense it. I can see it in the worried looks, the tense, whispered conversations, the forced smiles. And I can feel it in my head, which feels like someone has poured cement into it, overwhelming my thoughts and constantly dragging down the few that manage to float to the surface. So this is kind of an example of how I've tried to be his voice. I'm talking like him, as him. He couldn't tell his story, so I'm trying to tell his story for him. And read a couple of others, and this is from a kind of a chapter of one of his past life experiences, and he had a particular dream, about what he wanted to be when he grew up, and that didn't happen. And he's kind of talking about that and thinking about that while he's sitting on a plane. And he says, when your dreams collapse, you can feel the air beneath your wings disappear. And the wings that lifted you gently towards your dreams drop and solidify into a metal straitjacket that starts to strangle your breath. So I know the passages I'm reading are probably, intense, but the books does have, I would say lighthearted moments also. But it's him speaking, at the end of the day. And I think there's one more, if that's okay, that I like to read, and this is important because it kind of touches upon the whole issue of how we really don't think about aging and sickness and death. And we never talk about these things till they actually happen to us. And most of us are really surprised when they actually happen and completely unprepared for it. So at some point, during those 2 years, my mom decided that there was really no point rushing him to a hospital when something happened, because anytime we did that, he would come back even worse. So as a little snippet about that, that, he's just come back home from a visit to a hospital due to kind of a scare. And his wife is talking to him. "You look so much better," she says. "You and me both," I agree. "I think we should just stay here. Let those doctors come to us instead," she says, half jokingly, but watching intently for an imperceptible nod of agreement from me. She holds me tight as we make a joint decision, this time without a conversation. So this is the joint decision that is being referred to is really the decision to not ever go back to a hospital and just deal with just deal with things as they come.
A couple more questions have come in. I'm sorry if I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
What did your kids think about the book?
Um, they were actually they were the ones who actually encouraged me to publish the book, and they were just like anyone would be uncomfortable about being in the book, but they 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 kind of made it happen in some ways. So uh, I was very grateful for their support and encouragement.
And another person had asked, have you done a lot of writing in the past? You have expressed your ideas so beautifully and emotionally.
Uh, no, this is my first book. Not a writer, and this book just, I would say, happened. And well, thank you for the compliment, but no, I haven't done any writing in the past, unless you include, PowerPoint slides and concept papers.
Well, actually, I was curious, does working in like healthcare, I, I don't know what exactly
Yeah.
you do, but did it have like an impact on your impression of the care or like the decisions that were made?
Um, well, ironically, what it taught me was that even if you work in healthcare, when you're actually facing a personal situation, whatever knowledge and experience and exposure you might have, whatever data you might know, whatever you might know about clinical processes and whatever you might know about the pharmaceutical industry, whatever you might know about how insurance works, whatever you might know about community-based care, and everything, you might know the healthcare system in and out. But when you face a personal crisis, uh, I'm not sure how much it really helps. I mean, the only thing I would say is that I was able to, I would quickly go do research on everything that anybody said. I'm not sure my decision making or any of the other things I did were better because I was in healthcare. Uh, and you can talk to clinicians as well, right? And when they go through a personal healthcare experience, uh, they're just like anybody else.
Hmm.
And you always hear about physicians saying that they never treat their own kids, uh, because, or, even if they're neurologists, they probably will not take care of their own parent because, your kind of your personal decision making and your personal relationships and what you do as an individual is so different from what you do professionally. So yeah, it can help a little bit. You might be better informed. For example, when somebody said, use the term palliative care, I knew what it meant. Was I more accepting of it because I understood what it meant? I wasn't. I completely shut it out and said, no, 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 no. That's not what's going to happen. you know. Uh, so I behaved more as a daughter, as a family member, than uh, you know as someone who knows, you know, understands healthcare.
Hmm.
And that's a long answer to to simple question, I guess.
Oh,
Hello.
it's really interesting. I mean, even as like a philosophical thing, I feel like of the animal reaction to the
Mm.
pain and whatnot versus the logical, like I've learned these things and how the two systems don't connect.
They don't always connect. No.
One's gonna override the other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think you do learn from your personal experience, though. Maybe not as much, not more than you learn from your professional experience. So uh, I would say my approach to any any kind of healthcare crisis is likely to be different now based on this experience. Whether it'll be right or wrong, I don't know, but it will be affected by this, this specific experience. Would anybody else like to, share, their thoughts on, the topic of it, or share any of their experiences? No? So, Matt, anything else that you think would be helpful at this point? I can definitely I can read a little bit more if
if you want to, it might be a bit inspiring. Feel free.
Okay. So I think what I could do is really start at the beginning of the book, which is the the prologue. And the prologue actually starts at the end. The prologue is actually I don't know how to say this without sounding morose, but it's actually the few moments before he passes away. And so let me just read that quickly. There is a silver hue to the shadowy faces that float above me, caring, concerned faces. Someone talks to me, a warm hand grasps mine, another soothes my brow. A cool drop of water touches my lips, delivered not by the metallic touch of a spoon, but by the fragrant tickle of a tulsi leaf. Tulsi is like the Indian basil plant. Ganga Jal, whispers Khushi in a shaky voice. So Ganga Jal is holy water. I hear the jarring jingle of the phone far away and loud muffled voices. All of a sudden, I realize that Anya is talking to me. I feel her face close to mine, though her voice seems far away. My name is Agastya Raj. I am 75 years old. My life's gradual descent began 21 years ago after a seizure. Soon after, my mind started to play strange tricks on me, going blank for a few seconds, randomly, without notice. I would often turn still and stare strangely without responding to questions, in a frozen state of either suspension or repeated action during these episodes. I would break into a cold, silent sweat after each episode. It was frightening and disturbing every time. A complete loss of oneself for a few moments, with no thoughts, no control on actions, and no recollections thereafter. All these years, the unspoken question that constantly nagged me: what if? What if I had a memory lapse while driving? What if I blanked out while crossing the street, while in a meeting, while signing a check? I tried to predict these blank moments. That way I could stop pouring tea or pause while crossing a busy road to let the moment pass. I tried not to think about it, worry about when it might happen. But I was not able to shrug off this dark cloud at any point in time. So this is a reference to, so my father, many years actually before the main stroke, had started getting these really mini seizures. I think they're called micro seizures, where you just kind of lose track for a few seconds, and it's very unpredictable, but very unsettling at the same time. Life around me continued at its usual pace. While I crossed my fingers behind my back every day and at every encounter, there were moments of extreme joy and pride that did lift me out of my personal fog, and I was carried along in the general happiness. Memories that kept me going, memories I wrote about every day in my little notebook, memories I quickly tried to remember after every blank episode, relieved and thankful that the spark that fizzled through my head for 30 seconds did not wipe out anything precious. Memories that gave me a reason to smile as I struggled to balance a checkbook or deal with the chaos in the flat as the maid rushed through, making dust fly with her broom, and then settling it back down with a mop, a fruitless exercise that was repeated every day in an effort to combat the incessant heat and dust of Delhi. Memories that seem hazy sometimes as my mind slowed down under the subtle pressure of the Dilantin that coursed through my blood. Dilantin is an anti-seizure medication that he was on for probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years. Never in the right place when the electricity zapped through for 30 seconds, but incessantly thickening my senses otherwise. Memories that pushed me through the frustrations of my unpredictable state and pulled me above the mediocrity of my unremarkable days. Strangely, I even have memories of my mind when it was buzzing with activity and desire and excitement, driving a young man towards his lofty goals. 2 years ago, the temporary short circuiting in my head took on a monstrous new mutation. My mind was zapped in one wanton episode, leaving my legs useless. Another event followed within a few weeks, detaching all connections between my mind and body. My mind no longer controlled in my head, unable to be uttered. I have tried very hard. For 19 years, I lived with the uncertainty of many seizures that created havoc in my mind. And for the past 2 years, I have been helplessly paralyzed. Now I am tired. I am ready to move on. There is no fear or panic or regret, just a sense of peace and finality and withdrawal. Every actor has an exit cue. The show goes on, but actors who have no role to play cannot sit on the stage forever. They get in the way of life. Right now, I am that actor. I have been holding center stage immobile in my hospital bed for 2 long years. A gentle goodbye hug from Soumya, Anya says. I smile. This was what I was waiting for. A final bear hug from my daughter. One last long breath, an effort to make my last action on earth as whole as possible. With my eyes closed, I feel the inhalation filling up my lungs. I am so deeply, deeply tired. This cannot go on any longer. And so it does not. I exhale. So that's the prologue of the book. And from there, we kind of go back 2 years to the point where the first stroke happens, and as you read the book, you basically go along on that journey with him.
Well, it's quite impressive that this is your first book and you did not write before, as it's very evocative and potent, and just, I don't want to say like it feels like you're there, because it's very, well, it's funny that you said that this book is not meant to be depressing, because it is very somber.
I guess. Yeah, I guess I haven't really. I should probably, have picked, some of the funner parts. So there is a chapter about his childhood. There's a chapter about his time in London. He spent a few years there. There's a chapter about how he met my mom. There's a chapter about him and me and our relationship. There's, his thoughts on religion and how they evolved over the years. So there's a lot of, content that, that I think these folks who read the book, and I'm too close to it to be objective, but other people who've read the book have said that they've enjoyed it in different ways as a story. It's like being he comes for them, he comes alive as a person, as an individual, as like I said at the beginning, an ordinary person. And it is precisely that. It's an ordinary person with an extraordinary life story. And I say extraordinary not because he's my father, it's because every one of us has an extraordinary life story, because it's unique. It's just like no two people look alike, no two people have the same life story exactly. And that's what makes us interesting, and that's what makes us, I guess, human.
Absolutely. And it is, even if the somber part, like with that, it is like inspirational for like what you've been talking about of like our relationships and resilience and so forth. And I also like that the structure of the book is starting off with that and then talking about these other aspects of his life. It's almost like inverse of what you might expect with a book of someone passing away at the end, rather.
Yeah. And I'm not sure why I wrote it this way. This is how I wrote it, maybe because, and that's how it stayed. And I actually see a question in the chat about whether I had an agent and an editor. I did not have an agent, but the publisher I worked with did have an agent, have an editor that they worked with. And this is interesting because when the editor read the book, he messaged me and he said, I'm really not going to change anything, and I'm just going to do some, grammatical editing, and I'm going to, just lay out the book or whatever it is, make sure the paragraphs are okay and things like that. Sure. And I was a little bit disappointed because my first reaction was that he's not paying attention and he's kind of just glossing over, this. And so I actually asked him if we could talk. And we did. And when we talked, he said, when I read a book, I just read it from beginning to end as a reader. That's the first thing I do as an editor before I even start thinking about how I want to edit it or what I want to do with it. And then he started telling me, a story about his grandmother who had some, health issues at that point in time. And he said, thank you for writing this book. This has been so helpful to me. And so he, so he said, I don't want to edit it because I don't want to change it. Not because I don't want to spend the time and energy to do it. And we kind of, his his role was kind of done in a few weeks, but we stayed connected as two people since then. So
Wow.
yeah, it was like I was really upset when the first time I heard from him. I'm just going to let it be. And he had this really abrupt way of maybe writing the message, which made it sound like he wasn't going to spend much time with it. And so yeah, so that's my editor story.
There's another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was looking at the questions as well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
There was one about are you sharing these experiences and book readings with other caregivers and institutions?
I would actually like to do that. I do have, I am in conversation with an organization in India that is trying to draw attention to caregiving per se, that kind of physical, mental, emotional burden on caregivers, and kind of make that conversation, happen in India. Where caregiving, just like most societies, is mostly family members taking care of each other. And so I am in conversation with them, and I think we'll probably be doing a blog and a conversation of some sort in a few weeks. And I am also talking to the Conversation Project at the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, based in Boston. And their whole focus is end-of-life conversations and how important it is to have the conversation. And so I am, but I'd love to, if people have suggestions, I'd love to do more. Those are just kind of a couple of examples. There's also a home care agency in India that I've been talking to, and because for me this book is not a commercial enterprise. I'd like to share it with as many people as I can who can help.
And there's another
Question. I think somebody was asking a question. Right?
Oh,
The audio is a little.
I think it's
background noise.
Yeah, it might be background noise.
Okay.
I think Shubra, did you have a question? Nope. All right, they muted. Okay. There was another question in the chat, though, similar, but is there any group or any other platform in our town where you can share similar experiences?
I don't know. I mean, I would love to participate in any such conversations, or if there's any other platforms that it makes sense to participate in. I'd love to do that. So, any suggestions are really, really welcome at this point.
Would it be when I send out the recap, is it okay if I share your email address to
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I don't have to, I don't know why I'm asking you this live in front of people. I could ask you in private, but is there an avenue in which people could be in touch with you to?
Yeah, so I do have a website for the book, and there is an option, there's a contact option on it. So the URL is hisvoice.life. And so that is definitely, I can just type it in here.
I can include it in the email afterwards too.
Okay. Yeah. And the email. That's those are kind of the best ways to be in touch.
Sure. There were two comments. If you'd like, thank you, Rima, for sharing. Those are very lovely, moving passages, and someone else said that they agree that there's lighter moments, and they, as they were reading it, they truly believed it was him and his voice, and they felt fully immersed in his life story.
Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much for this evening, and thank you everyone for coming. If you visit hisvoice.life, you can read more about the book there or order it. We also have a copy in the library as well. Do you have any final words, Rima?
No, just thank you. Please do reach out if you have thoughts, comments, suggestions about the book or otherwise. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you, Matt.
Thank you. And have a good night,
Good evening.
everyone.